Another thing that I can explain here is this is the distribution of our housing stock according to the energy classes of the EPBD. Right now in red, we are here. The average is 218, and most of our housing stock is in the D class. Government actually passed laws that say that by 2020, all social housing has to get rid of all the E, F, and G classes in the housing stock, which means for us pretty much 40% of our housing stock. And that's a huge challenge because it's 10 years left for us. And if you count 3% per year over the 10 coming years, that's only 30%. And some of the buildings that we retrofit are not in those 40%. So we're going to have to speed up the investment if we want to make it. And this is the real challenge. It's not about new build. Passive houses, low energy construction is great, but it won't be the challenge. The challenge is going to be the housing stock. And everybody right now is working on that. So if we manage to get rid of all this E, F, and G classes, that would bring the 2020 housing stock to 138 kilowatt hours per square meter, which is pretty much the equivalent of the new construction, the new build standard in 2005 thermal regulation in the north of France. So this is the challenge that we are trying to do right now, and it takes a lot of efforts for us because we have to plan and to find. And once again, I think what Jean was saying is very true. The problem is not technical. You have shown that very well. The problem is how do we get the money to finance all this? And then the problem is, and I'm not going to talk about that, is about skills. I work a lot inside the company to teach people how they can manage architects, how they can manage thermal engineers, because we as clients have to be able to define what we want. Right now, at the moment, it's mostly architects and engineers that tell clients what they should want. And it cannot work like that. So, and any architect who's honest says, when the client doesn't know what he wants, then you don't do good work. So we're also training people to be able to talk about energy performance in the project that we are managing. But I'm not going to talk so much about this. So the major problem on this is going to be financing the investment. And it's going to be how do you look at those investments in a financial perspective. And I'm going to explain that about. The idea is here, we're in social housing. We have capped rents. It's the same system in the UK. When we invest in the existing housing stock for energy savings, say 10,000 euros per dwelling, we can't raise the rent very much. Or we can raise the rent a bit, but that raise is going to finance pretty much changing the bathroom, changing the kitchen, and everything that has to be done anyway, because you have to refurbish the dwelling also. So the question is, why should we invest in all these other costs? Because there are, and especially in refurbishment, you can have 5%, we probably have between 5 and 10% in new build of other cost for low energy consumption. Now, in refurbishment, you probably have 25, 50% other costs. So why should we invest in that? And basically, the financial direction says, well, now that you say we should do this, why the hell should we do this? Because we're losing money. And that's when you have to change the way that people look at investments. And traditionally, in the real estate business, people look at the cash that they're getting, which is the rent. They don't look at how much housing is costing for their tenants. And if you start looking at this, which I'm going to show you, then you see that the attractiveness of your housing is not the same depending on energy performance. Today, but not so much today. If you look at 25 years ahead, then it makes a huge difference because we all know that energy is getting more expensive every year. And the idea here is to say that in the end, increasing the energy performance of a dwelling is going to provide an insurance against future risks, economic risks. That's going to be vacancy and non-payment of rents. That's going to be energy inflation, of course. And it's going to be also political and social pressures. For example, we've refurbished in 2007 some old single houses at 50,000 euros per dwelling. This is really, really huge. They're probably worth 120 now. So we've put in a lot of money because we needed to. Now, these investments were made and the energy performance that they reach is only 250 kilowatt hours per square meter, which means that they're still in class E in the EPBD. This means that by 2020 or 2025 in any case, they're going to have to invest at least 5,000 or 10,000 euros more to get to the legal standard, which imposes that they get to at least class D. Okay? So this means that the amortization of our investment is not going to be the same. Because, of course, you don't amortize on 25 years. You amortize that on 12 years. Very different. So if you look at the total cost of occupancy for a tenant in social housing, you're not at all looking at the same thing as the rent that gets in for the housing company. Because the tenant is paying for the rent, but he's usually getting something like 40% of housing allowance. So he's paying less than the money that we're getting. But he's paying for energy. And he's paying for just general charges, and that's neutralized in what I'm showing here. Now, if we look at several scenarios for energy retrofit, and not looking at the cost of investment, but just looking at what people are paying afterwards, we have business as usual scenario here, where you don't retrofit. And then you have a standard retrofit, where you just put, for example, double glazing, or you gain 5–7%. So it's almost nothing. You have 130 kilowatt hours per square meter, which is an intermediary objective. You have low energy retrofit, which in France is at 80 kilowatt hours per square meter. And you have low energy construction, which is at 50 kilowatt hours per square meter. Now, if you look at first year after refurbishment, you see that there are differences, of course, because energy costs are not the same. So pretty much you're 15% cheaper if you do low energy refurbishment, but it costs you way, way more. So in terms of, from the investor perspective, you're losing money. But if you look 25 years after, with 5% energy inflation, and that's with a general inflation of 2%. So, I mean, 3% over inflation on energy, and that's just a standard rate that everybody agrees on at the international level. You're 30 to 35% more expensive for the tenant. And if you take a 10% a year hypothesis, which would be a risky hypothesis, but which still could make sense because we're getting, at the moment, 10% on gas this year in France again. Then you end up with 70 to 80% overcost for your tenant after 25 years.